Welcome to another Figure Week, Hard Surface Week, Organic Week.
Hey everyone, my name is Ahmed Al-Douri. I'm a concept artist and former instructor at Art Center College of Design, Brainstorm, CCS, CGMA, and various other places. And I would like to introduce to you this digital painting course that I've created. But before we get into anything, I just want to thank you for the support you've all given me this whole time. And with the support of so many of you, I've been able to put together everything I know about painting into this digital painting course. You want to become a pro illustrator, concept artist, or even just a hobbyist, but you don't have a clear map to get there. And that's where I come in. I spent the last 6 months compiling everything I know from my 20 years of art practice, and I've turned it all into a map. Starting with foundations such as rendering shapes, color theory, painting basic subjects, understanding brushwork, brush economy, all that fun stuff, deconstructing the skull, drawing it from every angle, all the way to master studies, stylized painting, and you'll find yourself at the end of the course doing a concept art project based on everything that we learn in the first 14 lessons. So how does it work? Well, you sign up, you watch the lectures, do the assignments, post them to the community page if you want, and treat it as a self-study, except for those of you who have signed up for the weekly meeting, where I personally critique your work in a virtual classroom setting. I believe learning by repetition is super important. That's what I've sort of presented a lot in this course, and the assignments are tailored for that, as adapted from my time teaching at Art Center. And each of these lessons have step-by-step explanations in real time. If you've ever seen my videos, you know exactly how I teach. And this course is intended to be a substitute for a college level course, but you don't have to pay the $4,000 or $5,000 per class, racking up maybe $200K in debt. With my custom design course, you'd be paying a fraction of that. And of course, I also have payment plan options if you don't want to pay for the whole thing at once. Thank you for watching this, and I'll see you soon.
Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of Digital Artcast. I'm glad that you're all joining me again for another talk, another chat. Again, wherever you guys are in the world right now, I hope you're all staying safe with multiple things going on the planet right now. I know a lot of people are stressed or displaced, and definitely hoping you guys are just staying safe. It's a bad time out there. But again, I'm hoping that these podcasts and these chats are something that you can cling to and listen on while you're dealing with whatever you're dealing with. And I'm always glad and appreciative that you guys can be here to listen. Really special episode again today. I know I kind of say this with everybody, but I'm always just absolutely humbled about how many amazing people I can get on this podcast to chat. It really does blow my mind when people say that they want to come on and talk. It's always a pleasure when people say they will, and I know that, you know, schedules being put the way, it's usually difficult to arrange this stuff, but in the end, I always try my best to be accommodating, and my patience has finally paid off as we have Mr. Scott Robertson here again today for the second time on the podcast. How you doing, Scott?
I'm doing well, thanks. Thanks for having me on again.
Yep.
Yeah, as you know, I have a soft spot for people from Scotland, so...
The Robertson name is serving you well.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. So nice to join you, and to second your comments about the difficulties going on around the world right now. It's quite distracting and frustrating and disappointing and all of those sorts of things and tragic. We'll try to maybe take just a little break from that in order to, talk about future things and hopefully shed a light on some, hopefully better days and things to look forward to.
Of course. Yeah. I think it's one of these things when I've talked to a couple of people I know, because I'm on this side of the world and I know people from Ukraine, art has been one thing that they've been focusing on to really just create content and try and block that part of it out if they can, which is difficult. I know, it's always impossible. But art will prevail. I mean, if you look back even during the Renaissance and a lot of people who were traditional painters, some of the most beautiful things that came out of that were the stuff they created. So I'm hoping that it'll be the same with this, even though it's a really hard time. I'm hoping the things that come out of it also will be beautiful, that will maybe try and take some silver lining away from what's happened. So it's tragic.
Anyway,
so it's been a couple of years since we chatted. I think we've done the numbers, and we originally met in 2016, which doesn't seem like that long ago. Crazy how time has flown on. But then we had our first talk on the podcast in 2018. And at the time, again, you were talking about transitioning from entertainment mediums to more, I think the word is ecological, more kind of.
Over here we call it green tech. But
right.
Yeah. So there's all sorts of things you can do in the green tech space. But
saving the planet.
I did get a little, yes, exactly, which also, is super important to do. I did get a little sidetracked. Apple showed up at my studio and said, "Hey, you should come do this thing with us instead."
Yep.
And hire somebody to take over what you're doing on the green tech.
Right.
And it's like, it sounds interesting. And so I made the leap, actually. So I sort of disappeared for about 3.5 years.
Right.
So 18, 19, 20.
I
left May of last year, 21. So
okay.
It was part of the deal too. You sort of just disappear. You drop out of social media, no workshops, no freelance work.
Of course, yes. It's difficult with Apple. They're very traditionally secretive about everything they do, and
for good reason.
Of course. Yeah.
Yep. And you're sort of all in or not. And so I decided I'll make the leap and see what it's like to work for a big company.
I mean, kind of once in a lifetime, but I mean, definitely not your first big company that you've worked for. Definitely, I mean, you've been in a few, in your career. So, was Apple any different to other places you'd worked that were kind of large corporations?
I think it was. I haven't worked in that large a corporation before. I mean, Apple has 142,000 employees or something.
Oh wow, I mean, that's a scale.
Over half of that's in the retail stores, but I'm still. Some of the best and brightest minds on the planet are inside that company. So in that regard, it was quite interesting and fun.
Space,
but an amazing company. So a very positive experience all around.
Good.
And I can't, of course, say what I was doing, but it was all super creative and
of course
good to do while I was there.
Yeah.
And then I have, as things wrapped up there, and now I'm back into exploring green tech possibilities. Right. But when I left there, May of last year, I had a strong interest over the summer to explore into different software apps and creativity.
Right.
And I spent sort of the last 6 months of last year exploring a bunch of different apps.
Wow. Yeah.
And doing kind of a deep dive, and then reaching out to some dev teams, some software development teams,
right,
to work with them on their tools. Just honestly to help make the tools better.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of touched on it before we started recording, but you've kind of had your hands in everything at this point. Most things that are an app for either creativity or production, you've kind of touched in some way. Between AI, VR, and even iPad stuff, you've kind of explored a whole vast range. Was there any particular reason that was a thing? Was it just that from what you were doing previously, maybe at Apple, you felt that was something that was missing that you weren't getting to do creatively, or?
I think I've always been interested in creativity and process, and that feeds into the how to draw and how to render books, right? That's all. That's really what that's about is how to think and then how to communicate those ideas. And so I think it's an extension of that, and that there are now more tools that are becoming relevant. to support the same thinking process.
Right.
And so in still having an interest in writing the How to Design book someday, the third in that series, I wanted to, and I always have an interest in sort of staying relevant and staying up on what are the current tools and tool sets, because whatever book I'm going to put out, it needs to reflect, at least I would like it to reflect
what's in the field. Yeah.
What's in the field, what's modern, what's the most helpful, and then things to watch out for, things that aren't helpful. And then also to learn how to extrapolate, especially the abstraction world, back into something functional.
Right.
And that's this marriage of traditional drawing and rendering skills put with the abstract idea creation. But there's also a large fear of people when new tools come along, right? There's like a backlash of, it's going to take my job. I'm no longer relevant, all this sort of thing. And so what I wanted to try and do was be the guinea pig, right? That would jump in with an open mind and say, hey, how can I help craft these tool sets to make it a digital assistant and not a digital overlord? Because everybody's assumption is when like AI creation tools come along that, well, we're done, right? That's I'm now working for the machine.
Right.
And, that was sort of the same thought even with Photoshop, right? It's like, no, photo collaging and then painting over those collages was, like, where's the skill in that? But you see that it's just become another tool, right? Same with 3D, 3D modeling in sort of in support of drawing and painting, right? So the tools just change, and they always have changed, and they always will change.
Yes.
And so I think you can get stuck if you sort of say, well, these are my tools I'm using, and that's all I'm going to
use.
I'm done learning, right?
Yeah.
So it's not a very sort of progressive, adaptive mentality.
Yeah.
So in the interest of that, that's kind of why I dove in over the summer.
Right.
A bunch of the AI stuff, a lot of VR, even stuff on the iPad from a 3D modeling standpoint, which has just gone bonkers. There's, iPad modeling now, for me, at least on the organic side, there's two apps, Forger and Nomad.
Yep.
Yeah. And especially Nomad because of the rendering ability, the post-processing rendering ability with the filters and lighting. And it's just stunning. I can do on my iPad Pro, I can do 4K rendering in about 10 seconds. Out of Nomad. And it's like, what? How am I'm doing that on an iPad? It's ridiculous.
Absolutely crazy.
And it's got all the sort of basic ZBrush-esque modeling tools.
Right.
So you could call it ZBrush Lite almost.
Yeah.
So, and I bet for 80% of modelers, that are like hobby modelers and even professionals, that works, right?
Yep. Yeah. I spoke to a couple of guys who are professional 3D character artists, and Nomad is something that they are definitely behind. They think it's a very good tool.
Yeah, I think it's great. Glenn Southern has the best, tutorials.
Yeah. Glenn's a good dude. Yeah.
He does a great job of Nomad. So I bought a couple of his tutorials when I got into it.
Nice.
And
I'm sure Glenn will be screaming that you've done that. He'll be like, "Oh my god, he's a big fan."
Totally worth it. Yeah. So Glenn and I are in the same sort of community, and we overlap in Gravity Sketch a little bit. Yeah. For sure, Nomad and Forger are both fantastic. Forger's now become part of Maxon suite of modeling tools.
Oh, I never knew that. Okay.
Yeah, they bought them.
Okay.
So Nomad though, because of the post-processing image rendering capabilities, is pretty stunning.
Yeah, that's interesting as well, because I think, did they not just buy ZBrush as well recently? Pixelogic.
As part of, I don't know.
I think Maxon, because Maxon the guys who do Cinema 4D, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they just bought Pixelogic. They just bought ZBrush. Like about 6 months ago, I think.
I think that was the same time they picked up Forger. I think they're trying to obviously make a play for that whole suite.
Yeah, I was going to say it's interesting how that's going now as well, because I know the last time I spoke to Gio, Gio was working still. He left Adobe to go straight to just working with Adobe. What's the one they've got now? It's Adobe Modeler, I think.
Modeler, Modeler. Yeah.
Which is, again, I think that's more in the VR PC space, but again, that's a whole thing that is now, I've heard, especially for blocking out, Modeler is crazy good. Although I've also heard that Gravity Sketch in VR is good as well, because it's almost like Lego sets or old school kit bashing for building models for film. Like you can kind of just fire parts on and make stuff out of it. And yeah, if you're concepting really quickly, maybe not for production, but if you just want to get shapes down and build things, then Gravity Sketch is really good.
It's actually both. You
Right.
can use they have a great prefab library where you can import OBJs and just kit bash. You can bring in the texture maps even.
Right.
But at the same time, it's got actually pretty sophisticated sub-D modeling tools. So
Wow.
you could, I'm doing a series of cars right now for a big NFT launch, and they were all modeled. Then they're for a video game. They were all modeled entirely in Gravity Sketch.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I find it to be so much easier and much more intuitive than working on a flat screen, trying to interpret, forms on a flat screen. Obviously, there are advantages and disadvantages to both.
Yes.
But I have found that it's because of the fun factor to work in VR and be able to see it one-to-one, walk around the shape essentially, and sit inside the vehicle.
Of course.
Becomes super entertaining. So now you're more into it and you're engaged and you want to model, right?
Yeah.
And then the shapes I'm able to model are much more gestural and
It's machined kind of thing.
Yeah, it's just I feel less constrained, right? I'm able to capture more of the gesture of the form and the sculptural nature of it versus working on a flat screen.
As opposed to doing it in like ZBrush or Maya Max, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Maya, I'm a Moto modeler, but it's just polymodeling, right? Whether effectively Maya, Moto are equal on the context of, modeling architecture. So,
it's always crazy to hear some of the bigger 2D guys like yourself. Like even when I spoke to Yama Yurbarev a couple of years back, like, some of these guys who, came up doing a lot of, hardcore 2D stuff are now very accomplished 3D modelers also. I mean, it scares me almost when people are so diverse in their skill set, right? That there's just such a wide berth of stuff that you can do.
Yeah, I think I have been observing that it's easier for people that have the traditional skills to transition into 3D versus 3D modelers learning how to draw and paint.
Because you're building that part of your brain when you learn to draw in 3 dimensions with perspective, right? When you're building out that stuff, if you can do it cohesively, then you walk into a 3D program, you're just transferring that skill set into another medium. So, yeah.
And there's also the hand skills that just takes mileage to build the sort of muscle memory that you need when drawing. And that becomes sort of time limiter, right? How do you ever get the amount of hours you need to build that dexterity?
Yeah.
Right. And what happened was, I think historically, is that a lot of us that learned how to draw and paint traditionally, we didn't have computers at the time, right? There was no Photoshop
or VR or anything like that. Yeah.
No VR, no Photoshop, no iPads, no, CAD programs that were, helpful really much at all. And so what do we end up doing all the time? Drawing, rendering by hand and modeling by hand, right? With clay and wood and foam and that sort of stuff. So,
of course.
And we had years doing that without any digital distractions, let's say. So then when the digital things started to come in as tools to assist that way of thinking and communicating, right? Our hand skills, of course, came with us.
Right.
And that's just going to be tough to ever, get to that level of those people during that era, because that's all they did. So
that's an interesting point as well. And I don't want to divert too much from what we're talking about app-wise, but just quickly, do you feel like within the digital space now, when people are coming to learn concept design or design in general, do you feel like there is too much noise in the space and trying to learn? Do you think it's almost overwhelming?
Yeah, I'm even feeling it. I mean, I have 11 apps here on my list that I dug into over the last 6-7 months, and so
a lot,
yes, there is a lot to pick from, and I think there is something to be said for. It's great to have all these different tool sets available, but it's sort of unsatisfying if you don't master one of them to actually start to produce high quality work out of it. So maybe it's a good way to do, to think about it, is to do an appropriate amount of research. Like Glenn does a nice side-by-sides on well, this app does this app does that before you even jump in. Right. So I think now you actually have to do some research and figure out what is the right fit for the way I like to think and my own pipeline before I commit to learning that app. And then when you commit to it, try and stick with it long enough that you can get to the joy part of it, because right, the first month with it, or weeks to a month, is going to be frustrating, right? It's going to be slower than what you do with traditional media. It's so you just have to sort of work through that, and really it's about being patient with results out of the app, and also patient with yourself while learning. So if you can detach the productivity and speed component and not make that a part of learning, then I think your journey learning a new app becomes much more enjoyable.
Yeah, I mean, it's been the same for me even with production modeling and something like Maya. The temptation's always been there to move to something like Blender because of the hype and the tool set, and it's free and it's incredible. But the time spent learning Blender would just, for me, production wise, slow me down so much because I had to learn it, and because I'm so fluent in Maya at the moment, maybe not a master, but enough so the tool set is out the way. I don't want to really give that up, because then it almost sets me back 4 to 6 months to try to learn that again. So so
there has to be a big carrot there, right? So if you do a side by side and you say, okay, well, Maya and Blender, I'm super proficient at Maya, I already own it, I'm already up and running on it. So if I look at the modeling side of it, is Blender that much better on the modeling side that would justify? Probably not. For some people, maybe. But
in my experience, I don't think there's enough at the moment. I mean, it definitely, I think because it's free, it does do things in a sense that
but if you're already
in knee deep in Maya,
of
course.
But then then you have to look and say, well, okay, what it does have are these really nice, almost real time rendering stuff at the end of it with Eevee and cycles, and I don't think cycles is real time, but it's anyway, or maybe it is. But so now you say, well, okay. So is there something I can add to Maya that gives me that extra that Blender has? And for me, it was the same sort of thought about Modo, right? As like you and Maya, me and Modo with years of experience there. But it has a slow rendering engine, right? So Blender looked really appealing. But then what I did is I said, the modeling tools, I think modeling tools in Modo are really elegant, and the UI is very approachable, that sort of thing. And it works well out of Gravity Sketch. I mean, Gravity Sketch just puts out an OBJ, quads, have whatever you modeled in sub D there, you get in Blender or Maya or Modo, doesn't really matter. But it works really well. And so the export into Modo worked. But I was missing the high-speed render, right? So I did some research, talked to a friend of mine who's like a Modo expert and like a visualization pro. And I'm like, okay, look, there's some things out there. There's Autodesk VRED, right? There's, Octane. There's switching to Blender and then doing Eevee and cycles as the back end of that.
Unreal as well, actually. I've heard a lot of people using Unreal recently.
Unreal, now Unreal's really come on now,
leaps and bounds,
and which is like a real real-time render engine. Exactly, game engine. But there's a few too many smoke and mirrors in that app right now for me. The quality of the reflections and lighting, etc. You have to work pretty hard to get that. So I opted for Octane, and Octane then has become my rendering engine for my Modo work and my Gravity Sketch work.
That's within the Maxon family as well, isn't it?
No, Octane. It's standalone. It's its own thing. Otoi owns and built that. And so it's a standalone rendering engine.
I've heard a lot of people who use Modo have also used Octane as well. So I wondered if it was somehow linked. But
you can get a plugin for Modo. So if you want to stay, if you want to stay in that environment, but then you're running two apps at the same time. So I usually package my Modo scene. I set up all the materials in Modo, and then I package it and export it into Octane standalone. And then I run Octane only, so I can get the optimum performance out of it.
Are you using GPU rendering with the system you have just now? Is it? I think is it PC based? Is it using?
I have a PC I have a PC because you need it to do all the higher end VR work. Which I'm heavily into as well. So, yeah, so that the PC was really to support the VR modeling. And then it was, as a result, I have like 3 2080 Ti RTX cards in it.
Sell a kidney to get those ones.
Yeah, it's not the 3090s, but it is,
yeah.
3 2080s is still pretty good.
Trying to fight off the Bitcoin miners to try and get a hold of some of them just now. It's a
know,
bit of a nightmare.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but what's great is that for GPU rendering, it's great. Octane will use all 3 cards.
Right.
But, I have 2 monitors with a Cintiq and a regular monitor behind.
Right.
And so those are occupying a big chunk of both of those cards. So I really have 1 card plus a little on the other 2.
To run the render. Right.
To run the render. But it is significantly faster than anything that I've worked with.
And then you're using also the AI stuff as well to generate 2D images, which there are many of, multiple, a lot. Is there anything that's stuck out for you at the moment that you think is
so the AI, well, since we're talking about the VR and the PC, let me wrap that up with like my two favorite apps there.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So Gravity Sketch is my favorite modeler currently.
Okay.
It's effectively traditional sub-D modeling. So everything I learned how to do modeling in quads and doing retopology and all that sort of stuff in Modo,
right,
you can basically do in Gravity Sketch.
Right.
And now there's some new like incredible snapping features. You can snap surface to surface, so you can effectively do retopo in Gravity Sketch in VR.
Oh wow!
So I pretty much model all my cars straight up with cut lines and everything in Gravity Sketch. The other one I spent quite a bit of time in was Medium by Oculus, and that's before
went to Adobe.
Adobe bought them, right?
Right.
And now they still have Medium out on the Oculus store, but
I've heard support's kind of not been there for it since, or
Well, it's that whole dev team went into work at Adobe now because Adobe purchased Medium, and it's transforming into Modeler. And so Modeler is looking very, very promising. But it's a totally different sort of architectural mindset in how you model, right?
Yeah.
Because Medium was always voxel based. I think Modeler is still voxel based. It is. It's just that then they brought even more tools to it. So you have to have a whole mind shift when you
on how to do it,
when you go into that. But as far as being like super fast and fluid, it's kind of like it's kind of like Nomad on the iPad in a way, right? It's kind of got the ZBrush kind of feel. It feels the most like Clay,
right?
Is Modeler or Medium.
Probably makes sense with knowing the team, I mean, including Gio, who were there at the time, and Gio obviously being a very big proponent of ZBrush at the time and modeling in that. But then when he moved, even back in 2018 when we saw him at THU, he was demonstrating Medium back then. And I think he's probably brought a lot of that, he's
like one of the leads on Modeler. I feel bad because he invited me to the beta on that, and I have yet to spend any time in it because I was so busy at the end of last year. When he
of course.
Me. And then the other one that looks like it has lots of potential is Codon 3D, which looks like full suite of ZBrush modeling in VR. The real problem for me, and I keep jumping into it several times. There's also one called Masterpiece Studio, I think.
Right.
Masterpiece VR. They're very similar, but the UI is kind of a lift from the desktop Windows and UI. Right. And just floating a Windows UI. Imagine taking the window from Maya, all those tools and buttons and everything, and just lifting it and showing it in VR.
Right.
It doesn't translate. Everything's too small, too fuzzy. It's not elegant, not easy to make your way around. Yeah. And so that's what Gravity Sketch has done probably the best job of, is their UI is super elegant, designed for VR.
Yeah, I think that's one of the hardest parts of the whole VR experience is the UI, is trying to make it feel as natural as you can. I mean, there's some people who have tried to implement, UIs where your thumbstick's rotation would mean that you would select different tools. I've seen people who have even straight up tried to, put the tools in front of you like they're physically there, like a chisel or a brush, and like you just pick them up and use them. But I think that's still something, because the technology is so new, that we're still figuring out. And then even beyond VR, there's AR, which people are saying that is going to probably maybe dwarf VR because it then brings the two worlds of, reality, real versus, virtual reality, and kind of slams them together. So it'll be interesting to see how that technology evolves as well.
Yeah, I agree. I
yeah.
agree. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
I think my approach is just, keep an open mind to all of it.
Yeah.
And try all of it. I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of these things are so incredibly affordable. Gravity Sketch is free, right? So
is it still okay? Wow. Yeah.
So
yeah.
how can you not if you have a
No,
headset?
exactly. Yeah. The blender
And
argument.
it works on a Quest 2. So
Yep.
how can you not, say, well, I'll take an afternoon, I'll watch a couple tutorials, I'll jump in and see what it's all about.
And the Quest is wireless. They're relatively cheap and affordable,
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, the barrier to entry now for that is come way down.
Yeah. I was buying the original headsets from Valve when they were like, this big with the wires hanging at the back. So, I mean, it's come a long way in a couple of years. Yeah.
Yeah. So those are kind of my favorites on the VR side is Adobe Modeler, what it's becoming. It's looking super promising. And then Gravity Sketch is my go-to on the VR side. And honestly, I do all my modeling now in VR. I can't even tell you. It's like I jump back onto a flat screen. And I'm like, what? I have to look in multiple views to figure out where this point is in space.
Oh yeah, that's interesting.
And when you're in VR, you have stereo vision. Right.
Yeah.
So you can just reach out and where the point is in space.
Right.
And you can just manipulate it XYZ freely with confidence because it's effectively attached to your hand. Right. And you know where your hand is relative to your body.
Yeah.
And so that is, I think, probably the most impressive and, the biggest positive of working in VR is stereo vision, obviously. Yeah. So the ability to, move around the thing and see parallax shifting is awesome. And then I think the most sort of underrated part of working in VR is what it's doing for your spatial memory. And what I mean by that is that when I've built something in VR, a surface or a piece of architecture, right? I've made a place that I visited, let's say, that I'm standing within 1-to-1 scale. My brain effectively imprints the memory of that space like I was there, right?
Okay.
So if I was to draw that in a single still image in 2D, and maybe I do a final rendering of it and I paint it, right? I'm having to figure out all the shadows and lighting myself, or even I do a flat screen 3D comp of it. It still only feels like a photograph, right? At the end of the day. And so you know what it is when you look through a book or on a website and you see photos of a place, you don't really have much in the way of spatial memory of being,
I see what you mean.
Having traveled, right? If you look at stuff, show you a bunch of pictures of, California beaches, it's not like you're ever going to feel like you were there.
Yeah.
Right. But working in VR, hang on, let me just close this thing that keeps
so good.
popping.
Yeah, I think I know what you mean with the whole spatial awareness thing. It's definitely, if you stand in front of a person, even just a person, to draw them, it's way different than looking at reference photos on the internet, because there's so many minutiae and detail you'll see physically just standing in front of them. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah. Like if you're looking at photos, it turns it into basically shapes and values, right?
Yep.
But they're not volumes.
Like dimensions.
In a photo, right?
Yeah.
But when you're in a space and you walk around something, I'm finding that having been in a space, whether I'm doing a car or a building, right, or some bigger environment, because you can model it to any scale.
Yeah,
I can recall that architecture or that surface much, much more clearly in my mind days, weeks later.
Yeah.
From having been immersed next to the shape and next to the volume and seeing the parallax shifting. So I think that improving your spatial memory is sort of undervalued of what you get out of the VR experience.
I think it even draws back to totally what somebody told me when it even came to just drawing in 2D. Like they were saying that one of the biggest problems they had by a lot of students is because of COVID and because of online, people were taking so much of their drawing experience from looking at a monitor and, pulling up a reference photo of a person or a car or anything. And their drawings felt like it lacked that dimension like you talked about. But when a lot of people traditionally learn how to draw and they went out into the world and done urban sketching or, life drawing, that almost is like 3 to 4 times the amount of, memory that you'll get from drawing as opposed to sitting looking at a reference photo, because it trains you differently to look at something in a dimension when you're staring at it and it's right in front of you versus a flat screen. You just don't get the same experience.
No, you're missing the immersion and the parallax shifting, the stereo vision, the seeing volumes versus shapes.
Even people I know who paint outside in the world, because even looking at a sunset, for example, or a sunny beach on an image on a monitor, the monitor can never capture the things like your eyes can. I mean, you look into a sunset differently with real paints and real perspective. Some colors will just know they'll change because they're just different on monitors versus how you see them and perceive them with your own two eyes. So even colors like that. So
I would urge everybody, whether you're at school somewhere and there's a headset available now, everybody's stuck at home. But anyway, if you know a friend or you can jump into a headset and give it a try. I think it's well worth it. I'm full. Like if you asked me 5 years ago, would we be modeling in VR as like the future? I would have said, no, you're crazy, right? It's going to be, the flat screen modeling is getting so good now, blah, blah, blah. But and nowadays, totally. And you can go cut models or 3D print straight out of Gravity Sketch. It's
100%.
It's really interesting. And I think you just have to keep an open mind to it. Like, don't shut it down before trying it, and give it like a real try.
Yeah. Like a couple of months or something.
Exactly. Do it multiple times. I mean, even Gio, same thing at Medium, and he was coming from traditional clay modeling into ZBrush, and then he never thought it could be as good, right? But he kept going back.
I think it's all he does now is VR, I think.
I know. But he kept going back and trying it, right? And it took time to find what are the right tools in this new app that are familiar to me and carry over my knowledge from traditional media into this new environment, right? And that's what really sort of took him a while, was to work out his pipeline or his process, right? How do I achieve the same sort of shapes that I'm used to achieving with clay and ZBrush in this new environment? And that takes time. So, you have to be patient. You have to give it a couple tries. You have to experiment, and then then you can rule it out or go deeper.
Move on.
Right?
Yeah.
But and it does every time. Like, staying current on new tools just takes time, right? You just have to say, well, okay, this is just going to take time. I need to find whatever evenings, weekends, and I should jump in and just keep an open mind and keep always experimenting and trying. What's coming.
I think people just, like you said, it sometimes can get too frustrated with attention. It seems to waver because if you're not really great at something within a couple of weeks, then your brain's almost like, well, why keep wasting time? But for some people, I know it's taken a whole year to get to a point where they're comfortable with a software. But then it's a whole year, but then for the next 10 years, the software. So, it's not a thing where every second counts. I mean, I know your time's precious, but, you've got to be patient.
Yeah. And I think the part that people forget is that there is the learning curve takes practice as well. Right. So what I mean by that is that how you approach learning new tools, the more you do it and the more tools you try to experience, the better you get at how to approach learning itself from the beginning. So for instance, I've learned a ton of apps over the last, 5 years, and I sort of figured out a rhythm for my brain and like how best to approach learning a new tool. And so for me, it's about identifying an app that has potential, right? So the first thing is, does that app have potential to support the things I want to create, right? So what I tend to do first is I watch a bunch of tutorials, usually just jump on and watch them for free on YouTube because there's so much of a community out there now.
Of course,
and so I might buy one from Glenn, but I'll jump in and I'll look at the tool and I'll watch like hours of tutorials over, a couple of days. So I'll dedicate say a whole weekend to just watching tutorials. And what I'm trying to do is two things. I'm trying to evaluate the tools to see if they could support what I want to create. Right. So one thing is I'm qualifying it and saying, yeah, there's potential there before I jump in and try to learn and do anything. And this is before I even buy the app, right? Yeah. I just sort of heard about it, but this is my intro to it. Then the other thing I'm trying to do, not only evaluating does it have value, the second thing I'm trying to do is I'm trying to understand the architecture of the app itself.
Right.
And what I mean by that is that software developers are usually quite logical when they write programs. And if you can understand the architecture underlying the technology, then when you get stuck or you're working in the app later, you start to understand where things are arranged and why they're arranged certain ways. And so then it becomes, I got to say, much, much easier to almost predict where a tool might be, right? Because the way that tools are grouped based on a lot of times the programming or technical ability of the app, but that was driven by the programmers. So if you can sort of get in the head of the programmer and understand the choices they made and why, then you can start to understand like okay, these are primary shapes. They're arranged this certain way. Then they get broken into this. And then it's kind of like in ZBrush, understanding all the Z remesher, all those things like at a fundamental level. And I find that to be super helpful when I start getting stuck. Right. And now I'm at the next stage, which, okay, now I'm actually going to go get the app. I'm going to install it. Now I'm going to jump in. I'm going to redo the tutorials, but I already have a decent understanding of the architecture. And more importantly, I know which tools I want to go learn first. Right. So, because usually in each app, there's probably only 30% of it that I'm interested in. Right. And so
it's the 80-20 rule kind of thing. 80% of the time, you only use 20% of the UI.
I know. And same even in Photoshop, right? I don't use any of the photo manipulation stuff so much as just trying to use it as a painting tool, right? But it's really way deeper than that. And and I'm not interested in any of the 3D stuff or any of those sorts of tools because I have other better tools for 3D. So you can ignore a lot of it. And watching the tutorials first allows you to ignore a lot of it. And you get like right to the things you want to learn.
Yes.
So that's become my method, and that's how I try to do it with each new app.
Well, I mean, talking about the whole thing of the 3D experience within VR and your spatial awareness there, how is we kind of touched on it earlier, but how is the AI 2D stuff, flat screen stuff, how is that playing into your pipeline?
Yeah. I just started getting into that last summer as well. And I have, what do I have here? 3, 4, 5, 6 apps on my list.
There's a fair few, yeah.
Yeah. So I saw that as also something that you could easily, as an artist, a traditional 2D artist, Photoshop master or traditional painter, you could say, well, yeah, I don't want to work for the machine. That's the digital overlord. I don't like what it's doing. It's like, okay, fine, but it's here. Okay. It's not like just because you are opposed to the philosophy of it, that it's going to go away. Right. Yeah. So you have two options. You can block yourself off from it and say, and ignore it. Okay. Or you can jump in with an open mind and adapt and say, okay, is there a way that I can take this tool set and manipulate the tool set to be my digital assistant instead of the digital overlord? Right. And so that's really been my mindset. And I've reached out to a few dev teams to say, I think what you guys are doing has a lot of potential. I've tried it. Would you be interested in having a chat about, other ways from my perspective, on the sort of more traditional art side, as opposed to programming, side, things that you could do to make it feel better, right? For the artist to have more authorship, more control, things like that. And so my deep dive into the AI was, I'll just list off my apps I started with. So Art Breeder, Canvas with NVIDIA, which was an extension of Gauguin, which was that AI engine that Canvas grew out of. And then Viscom, which is now there's more than 3 people now, but a small dev team that's been trying to figure out, is there an assistant in the rendering side? Can we take a line drawing, render it, right, automatically with AI? So that's what they're trying to do. They're doing other stuff as well. Disco diffusion, which is like new on the scene. I don't know if it's actually new, but it's sort of like new in the concept art world. More people are starting to try it.
Which I've seen are probably one of the most impressive so far. Is that?
I think right now it is the best. It takes the longest amount of time to process.
To work it,
and It's much more robust, but it's also a little bit harder and technical to install. Like it's you, and effectively when you're doing your controls, telling it what to do, it's more like you're going in and I won't say replacing code, but there are, it's not like a beautiful UI with menu windows where you with a prompt.
There's no real front end for it right now.
No, there isn't.
Yeah.
And then Dream by Wombo is an iPhone app, but it effectively is the clean, simplified version of Disco Diffusion in a way. So, and then same with some of the categories and genres on Artbreeder are much more refined and have a friendlier environment to work in. So with all of those, I think the people that can use those AI images most effectively are the people that have the best traditional skills, because there are two things at play. There's design, so it's the what is in the image, right? The content, and then it's the refinement of that content. So, and I've done tons of stuff with abstraction over the years, whether it's photos or I used to do a bunch of collage things in Modo using the replicator tool. And I would take 3D elements and stack them up on top of a figure and get these crazy sci-fi suits, but they were all photoreal, super complex, right? So if you think of a traditional process, you start with a blank piece of paper usually. You might pull some reference images, but effectively you're stuck with a blank piece of paper and you start usually line drawing. Right? Then you fill in those lines with some silhouettes. Then you start to add volumes with shading. Then you start to refine the materials, right? Towards the end. And then maybe you start even in grayscale and then eventually go to color. And so it's each step along the way, the image you're creating gets a little more complex, right? Yeah. But when you use AI and abstraction as the way to start, it's the opposite. Right. So if you start over here with like blank piece of paper and each step gets a little more complex and you end up here with something photoreal and, in an environment or a scene, telling a story, communicating a design or an idea. Over here, if you do AI, you start over here and you literally in something like Dream by Wombo, you just put in some words. Yeah. Right. Which is actually the same as the original drawing. You start with words usually, right? This is my intent. I want it to be sporty, rugged, right? Whatever. So you do that over there. Same for drawing. They kind of start at the same place. So that part's very familiar. Where AI is really strange is that it jumps right to here, which is where we ended with the traditional method. It jumps and you go from the words to full photoreal. Now you're here, right? You're like, boom, I see all of it. And it's usually way, way too much, right? It's usually, in a lot of like Dream by Wombo, there's like usually 3 or 4 horizons within one image. And you've got to go in and crop it to find, okay? Yeah. So now you have a different set of tools that you need to use to take the super photoreal, super hyper complex image. And now you need to work backwards to this one, which was the one that has the intent and the design that you're trying to communicate, right? But you're finding it in a different way, right? This one's a slow progression of simple to complex. This one is the opposite, complex to desired simplicity or finished piece in the middle. Yeah. And so it exercises different tool sets, right? So you have to be more of an art director. And so there's because you can generate so many images so fast, a big part of it becomes editing, art directing by manipulating the prompts, right? And so having spent, I made like thousands of these things now, I have full folders and folders of these tests. And where the originality, the opportunity for originality using AI tool sets is within the control of teaching the machine. Yes. And what I mean by that is it's the data set that you feed the machine and the algorithm that manipulates the images, right? And then you get all these results. So I'm trying to encourage all those developers who are writing these programs to say, listen, I need authorship of the data set. Like for me, that's what I need. And I know it works really well because I can do it with Artbreeder, with 2 of the genres in Artbreeder. You can do it with the portrait faces and you can do it with landscapes.
Yes.
And so that's where you can control the data set entirely.
The kind of sliders, the genes, the things in them. Yeah.
And you can upload the images that it pulls from.
Yes.
Okay, so that's really at the root level where originality is going to happen. And because then it's a data set that I created, I uploaded, and it wasn't just a word prompt off the internet, and it wasn't an AI tool going out searching the exact same data set that you would search and I would search would be equal, right?
Yep.
And as a creator, I want authorship, right, of the imagery, right? Because I want my image to be more original than your image, let's say. I want it to be different, right? I want to express the things that I'm most interested in that final image. So right now, all the AI tools have pros and cons about this desire for originality and how they either let you do that, right, or they don't. And so I would say the ones that don't let you do that very well are Dream by Wombo, for instance, right? Mm-hmm. You and I, the only thing we can put in there in that app is we can put the word prompts, mm-hmm. and then we can choose the art style that it tries to apply to the photo mashup, right? But it's basically doing an internet query, and it sends off, looks for, right, things with those word prompts on the internet. Then it samples, pulls them, and then it has a sort of contextual. Sometimes some of the art styles try to turn it into a portrait piece or a figure. Right. Other styles are better at turning it into a landscape, right? So you sort of learn that which style works best for the content. So it's contextualized a little bit, but that's kind of the one that feels a little bit frustrating in like you get amazing results that are super complex and abstract. It takes a lot to paint over those and get them to a high level. But they're super inspiring to look at just to get ideas going.
Ideas fun.
Yeah. But they're the same ideas that, I think where the tools fall short is that if it feels like anybody can get to the same result, right? It doesn't feel like I'm bringing my value that I've learned for 20 years, 30 years,
right,
to this tool, right? So I'm really pushing hard that the new AI tools and machine learning algorithms leave the opportunity for artists that have a broad knowledge base. How can they influence it, beyond what like my mom could get, right? So if my mom can get the same image that I'm getting, then I'm disheartened. And I feel that none of my prior knowledge and skill have a value in this AI tool.
Yeah, I've even found it the same when I've been using Artreader, because I've been using it extensively the last week since you basically talked about it, and the results I have had have been incredible. And the thing I have found is that, people have said even to me like, oh yeah, anybody could do it. It's an AI generated. There's nothing artistic about it. But when I sit with an image, I don't just take the first image I get. I will sit and play with those sliders for sometimes a good hour, and the end result, even just tweaking something by like 0.1, like plus or minus, the things I have came out with in the final versus what it gave me originally are totally different, but have the elements I would say that would make a great piece. Even the one other night that the more I formed it with these snowy mountains and this thing off in the distance, I was like, oh yeah, I could put some birds for scale out the back there and a light coming down, and that could be a kind of like a Skyrim-esque kind of RPG thing. And those things have then inspired me. And when I started to get those ideas into either what genre or game I could do kind of a tribute to with those landscapes, you're then molding it to that artistic style. You think, well, there's compositionally, right, okay, if I use my ruler thirds, the mountain's up here, and then it kind of swoops down, so there's a leading line. And this is stuff where artistic brain comes in, like you talked about, where sure, anybody can press a button and an AI landscape's generated, but then to take it further into those aspects of now it's an artistic piece, that's where the artistic side comes in. So it's a very 50-50 relationship.
Yeah. And that, I think, feels like a digital assistant, right?
Yeah.
And then you're like, okay, yeah, this is speeding up my process. This is generating ideas I wouldn't have otherwise had with either just looking at photos or a drawing, that sort of thing. So those are the areas where I find it super inspiring and almost addictively satisfying. So that's a nice example, that art reader that gives you the sliders, right? So now what's happened then is that they've given you back some authorship control.
Yes.
So the way I used it, which was, yes, the sliders, but I did it different a little bit in that I took the time to build my own data sets. And so what I did, because the slider between the two images that it blends with, one is artistic style, right? Illustration style. And the other one is basically design or composition, right?
Yep.
And so I started doing these really simple black and white, even just Sharpie sketches or 3 values of gray, right? To delineate the composition, right? And I would scan those and I would build a data set of those that were compositional controls. Right. And those were original drawings from me, but now they've been put into that half of the AI equation.
Yeah.
Then I took some of my landscape paintings, and my dad was a landscape painter. And so I took a bunch of his landscape paintings that I had, of which I'm the only person who has them in the context of this, so now it's an original data set.
Right.
Meaning I'm the only one who has them in all this photographic form. Right.
Yep.
And so, or digital form. And so I did that plus my own landscapes, and I built that on the artistic style side. Right. And then I used, so now I've got a data set, 2 data sets, one for artistic style that other people don't have. And I'm using traditional line drawing and marker sketches to control composition, right? Which also people don't have. And so now that really feels to me like a digital assistant.
Yeah.
And now I'm creating original pieces that are derived from my own, my own work and my dad's work as a sort of a combo mashup. That I find to be more satisfying than the Dream by Wombo style. Dream by Wombo is literally like AI sketching. Yeah. It generates tons of like ideas, but anybody could generate those ideas, right? I don't feel there's a sense of authorship really. I will say, because there's 100 characters you could use, right? The more words you add, the more original sort of sense of authorship you get, because the odds go down that somebody else in the world would have picked the exact same words. Right. So if I'm using all 100 characters and I've got however many, 10 words in there or something or more, 15 even, now I'm actually starting to get that sense of satisfaction that comes from authoring the originality of the image.
Right. Yeah. I agree with you. I mean, like, it's one of these things where, like, if you could stand at the back of a canvas and look at, and somebody else held the brush and you said, okay, put a mountain there, put a stream here, and you were just kind of directing, like you said, you were just moving things about, then that's kind of where these things feel like they're going. And the less you have to maybe use words or slide stuff, and it comes to a conclusion really quickly with the data set you upload, the better it's obviously going to get in the long run. So.
Yeah. And so Canvas from NVIDIA is like that, right? Canvas from NVIDIA is like, if you have strong perspective drawing skills and a good sense of image composition, you bring those skill sets when you define those shapes.
Because the NVIDIA one, you actually paint, it's like a brush,
paint
right?
The shapes, right? And they're color coded, right? They're color keyed to different topology or landscape elements, right? So river, sky, mountain, grass, trees, right? Those are all different colors. Yep. And so you're basically making shapes. But if you have the ability with traditional skills to draw in perspective, you know how to change the scale of those shapes, right? Yeah. To hint at where is the horizon. And it's smart enough at then knowing where the horizon is as well. So you're helping it to better understand your intent. But you're in full control of the composition. And so that has a lot of authorship ability as compared to just using word prompts, for instance.
Yeah, definitely. And then again, it's one of these things where, I mean, you probably feel that way, that with NVIDIA, that would be a good combination to integrate into something like Artreader, right? If you could get to a point with a picture where you were like, I just want a mountain, like right there, and you could maybe just paint that in quickly and it would obviously regenerate, make it up again. Yep. You think that would be a good combination of like those two minds coming together?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I think so. Because what's missing out of the canvas is the art style, right? It doesn't ever looks like a painting. It's always photoreal.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And what I've experimented with is taking those photoreal images and then throwing them into like a post-processing app, that does filters. So
Right.
then you can get the artistic feel of the more painterly feel that's maybe more interesting to paint over the top of.
Of course.
And can't remember the one I was using. John Park recommended it to me.
Hmm.
But there was a good app. There's a bunch of them, but artistic art filter ones make it look like a watercolor oil painting. The traditional stuff. But so that you can take those canvas images and manipulate them even further. You can also then take your canvas images and build a data set inside Artbreeder. Right. So you could take all your landscapes that were AI generated.
Yeah.
Right. And this is like the snake eating its tail. Right. Now you start to you feed it its own creation. So I could go in there and draw my own compositions, whatever I wanted. I could then filter them in another app after Canvas. I could get a watercolor, oil painting, pastels, whatever look I wanted. Then I could load those into Artbreeder and then use those as my art style images.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But they also have the compositions as well, because I created the compositions. So I think that there are a lot of really interesting multi-app mashups, right? And you only sort of get there when you take the time to try and understand the apps at a fundamental, deep level, right? And what are they giving you for your pipeline and your process? And how can you exploit what it gives you, right, to support your desired outcome.
Yeah. Is this a thing where it's all kind of building and, we'll maybe wrap up with this, but, the whole time I put out questions for you, for kind of online, people knew I was coming to interview you, the kind of common question we got back was, where's the next book coming in the series for you? Because you had the how to draw, how to render. So the how to design is obviously the one people have been looking at. Is this something that you're building towards with these experimentations?
Yeah. Everything I do with all these experiments, I have the plan to drop them into a book as a chapter, right? So I would do here's my experience in Artbreeder, pros and cons, right? Here's a chapter on that. Here's 10 pages that cover my experience and exactly what we've just been talking about, right? In the context of new tools. So how to design would have a new tools section. I don't really like doing tools or software at a granular level because it changes so fast, right? So I don't want a book to become outdated. So most of my discussion around software and tools has been about architecture and the philosophy behind the thinking, right? And that's where I don't really matter how many revs come out of the software. Generally speaking, when a dev team has decided on the architecture for their app, they're going to stick with that for a period of years, right? Because that's a big jump to then all of a sudden switch a rendering engine fundamentally, right? So I think I'm okay talking about apps and software in the context of a book chapter, but it will be from a slightly different approach. It'll be a higher level approach about, here's the view from up here about what these tool sets can do, and here's a way mentally to approach them. So that you don't feel threatened by them, and you sort of need to, you need to own the machine, basically.
Make it work for you.
You need to. It won't be upset with you if you dictate to it what you want it to do, right? But you don't want to be, at the mercy of it. So you have to just really dig in and say, what does it do well? What can I manipulate? Where can I keep my authorship? Where can I keep the creativity, the originality? Right? Where does it give me an edge professionally? Where can it help me see new things that I wouldn't otherwise have ever thought of? Right? So how can it help me broaden my style, my visual library? Right? And so I think it's fantastic for those things. By the way, I mean it's like, wow, I generate 100 landscapes in an afternoon, and if you asked me to draw all those, I would have not come up with 80% of these are things I wouldn't have ever thought of.
It'd be weeks worth of work as well, as opposed to hours as well.
If you ever get there, right?
Yeah.
And so as far as broadening your style selections, right? I think it's hands down the future, right? I mean, it's already here. Don't argue with me or express, and discuss whether or not it's coming, or does it have a future? It's
it is here. Yeah.
It's here. It's been here for several years. And, if you're, and that's just where it's at. So, either embrace it and help steer it, right? Or you can ignore it.
He who is resistant to change is destined to perish, I think is the old saying. So it's even people say the same with VR and its use case, and the fact that, you know, like, it's not going to change the landscape. But even for me, outside of art, you know, as a lifelong gamer, VR was one of the first things. For many years in my adulthood, games were never really hitting the same. Video games, I mean, they were cinematic, they were getting more, you know, realistic, but VR is what really reinvigorated my sense of having fun in a game environment, because you were in it, you were physically experiencing these things. And it's the same with art now. You know, people, once the gaming thing passed on and VR had kind of done its thing with that, and then people started to use tools within it, you know, and art and VR sculpting, you know, people were like, you know, it's a fad. It's, you know, it will never beat VR. It will never beat, it'll never beat ZBrush. It will never beat Maya. But now, you know, we're getting to that point where the tools are so advanced, it is happening, and very quickly, you know, within the matter of years rather than decades. You know, it's the exponential growth of it has been incredible. So, and obviously more and more people are embracing that side of the world. Yeah. So I think you're right in what you're saying. You have to really embrace it. Yeah.
It was like a year ago or something that I played like Half-Life Alyx, right, in VR.
Which is incredible. Yeah.
And I can still remember the layout of rooms.
Yeah.
Because I walked through them.
Yeah, 100%.
Right? And then a facehugger scared the shit out of me, and I had to, you know, tear off the headset, right?
Yeah.
But I can still like have a visceral memory of experiencing another place.
Yeah.
Because it was in VR.
Yeah.
And I just don't get that through a flat screen.
I'm the same. You know, even the times when I first was playing with VR, and, you know, the early days of the Vive headset and all the huge controllers, and I would play a game for maybe an hour or two, and when you take the headset off, you would forget where you were. You were forgetting you were in your room or in
totally. Yeah.
It's scary because your mind plays such tricks on you. And the first times I was playing, you know, the vertigo, the sense of like falling, like a lot of that stuff was like, you know, you didn't have your sea legs, as I said it, you know, early on. But now it becomes almost an extension of you. When VR, I actually found a sense of like loss when I left a lot of those places and came out back into the real world. I couldn't feel the same way I did when I was in VR. It was scary.
Yeah. It doesn't scare me. I enjoy the like just white room, clean modeling experience where I just control the lighting and the HDR that's reflecting into my surfaces, like if I'm doing a car. What I love is just the lack of distractions, right?
Yeah.
I don't have anything popping up in my
YouTube or anything, music session,
right? There's no email popping in. Mm-hmm. There's nothing that distracts me. So when I go in there, I find it so enjoyable to just focus on the task at hand. Mm-hmm. And nothing moves in that modeling space unless I physically move it. Right. So this is very different than a video game experience where there's things in the space that are approaching you and, you know, chasing you, whatever. But that's very, very different. You react to a lot of the environment. This is you're in full control of the environment. So, I mean, it's one, I find it super comfortable as a result because nothing moves until you move it. Right. So there's no disconnect between your camera and the environment. Right. The worst for getting sick and nauseous is when there's a disconnect between what you see and feel. Right.
Yep.
And so there's always like rock solid, and I always sit when I'm doing it. So I'm you know, I always lock vertical when I'm working. So I find it rock solid movement wise. And so that allows me to do like 6-7 hour sessions, you know, during a day.
Oh, wow.
Not all in one go, but for the total for the day, I can do 6.
Right. Okay. I was going to say your head would be killing you.
The most I can do in headset is about 3 hours.
You start to feel it on your head after that with the headset.
Yeah, exactly. It's more like becomes physical.
Like a weight thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I work with a Rift S because it's lighter.
Okay.
I like it better. I think it's more comfortable than the Quest 2. And having started with tethered cords, it doesn't really bother me to be tethered. And I'm seated. So it's not like it's, you know.
You're moving about and turning.
Not standing and moving around the room. But And did you have any questions from people that you wanted to ask? I got a little more time.
Yeah, I mean, mostly, to be honest, it was mostly about your new book and about, you know, if the book was ever kind of coming out, if you had an idea about.
Soon. So cut right to that right away. It's not going to be here soon. Yeah, I'm now shifting back. I did a NFT, a 3D NFT with Crypto Motors last Thanksgiving. So that was something I did over the summer, which is a whole nother topic. The whole NFT space is just insane.
I'm working in that space right now, so that is definitely a whole other topic. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we could have a talk about that at some time if you like, because I have learned a lot about it. And we're doing a big one soon, middle of this month, with a group I collaborated with called Whip Season, WHIP season.com. It's basically like collectible baseball cards in a way, but they're all cars, and they're all cars as part of a video game. And so it's very much a 3D heavy, offering. And the cards just are keys to unlock the 3D asset in a metaverse. So there's a large utility function to the 3D asset, which is the same thing I did with Crypto Motors back in November. So
we're the same. We're doing a collectible card game at the moment, and the collectible cards are NFTs, but then they have a function because we're building. That's why I'm on board, because I'm doing 3D. So we're building a 3D game that facilitates the cards that you can use in the world as a physical card game, and then we're building the 3D environment. So the NFT at the moment really is for us as fundraising, is to build capital to make the actual game. Correct. NFTs is just a part of it, but yeah, we're finding that space really interesting, and now we're building function in the NFTs. A lot of people are getting on board because it's one thing they found that people have lacked from the NFT space is that there's no real function of them past collecting. So
if you can attach utility, it's got much more. It has longer legs to the appeal for the person who buys it, and it has more value. Especially if you end up in a like play to earn situation, like if you can get it into a play to earn game,
that's what we're aiming for. Yeah,
you can make back the money, right, that you used to purchase the car in the first place.
Yes, that's pretty much what we're doing, because we're in the world that Matt has built out. So I'm working for Matt Gazer, so he's my boss at the moment, and he's worked for many years in Disney, Warner Brothers, Universal. He's worked on big film projects as a concept artist and visual development artist, but he took all his kind of money from that to build this company, and now he's using that to build out the world of Dr. Zamzi. And the card game is something that was kind of the first thing, because working through NFTs we can raise that capital. But now also we're talking about doing a full feature 3D game, a TV series with possibly with Netflix or something, and then also a film at the end as well, maybe with DreamWorks, to do a full animated feature. So yeah, the NFTs at the moment are kind of just funding us to keep us going through the initial stages. But yeah, we're working on the game first.
I mean, there's a lot of controversy around it because it's cryptocurrency, right? And a lot of,
power usage, the energy and stuff like that.
It's power usage. It's a lot of them are quite dirty because of where they're being minted, right? So it really depends where it's being minted on how dirty it is or is not.
Yeah.
And so we're using, we signed a contract with Offsetra. Offsetra's in the UK. Right. And they will track your mint energy usage and how clean or dirty. So they actually measure the CO2 output during your mint. And then you donate to reforestation or a green program to offset your CO2.
Your carbon footprint, right?
Your carbon footprint. So you can do an NFT drop that is carbon neutral. It's not carbon free, right? But you can offset the carbon produced by the energy used, right, to be neutral, so that you're not, making the problem worse. And I do fundamentally believe that that's going to get cleaned up over the next year or so.
Yeah, well, we use primarily Wax crypto at the moment. We're on the Wax blockchain, and the Wax blockchain is inherently one just for gamers, but also it is one of the cleanest cryptos, and so that's the reason that we're on that blockchain, because the reason it supports the gaming side of it as well as the clean energy side. So we've made that conscious decision early on, and Matt was very clear about what he wanted to do with that, because Ethereum was obviously, but Ethereum 2 is coming out. That's supposed to be even cleaner. So,
it's going to all go to proof of stake versus work, and then that'll effectively get rid of mining. So then will be very, very little energy usage.
Definitely.
So, which I can't wait for.
Of course.
In the meantime, I think if you're going mainstream, the group I'm attached to, they wanted to do mainstream because of the security of Ethereum. Everybody has it, et cetera. It's a big launch, that sort of thing. So I can understand that. So I think that this is kind of your best option currently, is to do a proper offset program, to be neutral at a minimum. What you're doing is better if the token works with what you're trying to do. Well, we'll talk more about this. We should chat.
A whole other can of worms. But I mean, even what we talked about today, Scott, was great, and I think for everybody that's listening just now and have got to this point, I'm sure they've really hung in your every word at this point, because it's one of these things that I love about your approach to work, is that even as you continue to go on and do more work, you never really give up on embracing new technology and new ideas. So
I try not to, but it does take effort and it does take time, right? And you can't just try not to put pressure on yourself about the results, right? Just take time, learn the process. And I think a side benefit is you learn a lot more about the way that your own brain thinks, right? Yes. Even if you explore a tool, you watch some tutorials, you start to better understand your own brain and what stimulates it. Yeah. And you're like, wow, I found that thing I just watched 3 hours of tutorials. I didn't get any of it. I just don't connect to that. It's like, great. You just learned something about
yourself. Yeah.
Exactly. So that is totally time
well spent.
Well spent. Exactly. So I think it's all about that ongoing, lifelong learning journey. I don't think that ever goes away.
Know thyself. I think it's one of the hardest things about becoming an artist, is that knowing your whole visual language is difficult. So yeah, definitely. Okay, so we'll let Scott go because he's got a busy day ahead of him. But if you guys have listened to this point, thank you again for listening. If you have any questions for Scott, you can leave them down below. I'll try and forward them on. And again, I'll leave all of Scott's social links or art links, and of course every app that he's talked about. We'll try and extensively list all of those below as well, so you can check them out for yourself. And that's pretty much it. Thanks to you guys again for listening. Thanks for Scott for coming on. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thanks, Gordon. It was fun to catch up.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll see you guys in the next episode. Remember to check us out.
Pray for better days ahead with the rest of the world. So,
yes, 100%. Yeah,
everybody be well and be safe out there.
Yes, our thoughts are definitely with the guys in Ukraine right now, and I hope everybody in that country is staying safe. I'm hoping maybe by the point this podcast episode comes out, then things have changed and we are in better days. But we will see what the world has to offer for us. But positive thoughts going out. And then again, we're on many podcast services across the board: iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and of course we're on YouTube for the video podcast. So check us out on all those channels. And we'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.